Hiyo Gamers. So what's the deal with Inazuma 4 stars? We started strong with unique character types, with Sayu being the first Anemo Claymore and being a new healer ever since Diona. That is so long ago. But what has Sayu done for team compositions? Where is she now? There she is. But actually though, the Inazuma 4 stars that came out starting with Sayu had potential to fill roles that were otherwise not used, and with Sumeru coming around the corner, how will Inazuma 4 stars shift the meta, and how will new Sumeru 4 stars deal with that meta change? You gotta admit though, our Inazuma 4 stars are very unique. Sayu being a Claymore character who can heal, also being another healer since Diona, Kujou Sara being an Electro booster that was supposed to rival Bennett and sort of shift the meta towards Electro, Thoma being a Pyro shielder that could help with setting up Pyro application, for better or for worse, Gorou being a Geo buffer and facilitating the already growing Unga Bunga Geo element. Rest in pieces, EM damage Gorou. And I'm going to skip Yunjin, because even though she was during the Inazuma period, she is still technically a Liyue character, and with arguably power levels similar to the existing Liyue cast, just with a specialty of normal attacks. Not niche, specialty. Anyway, back on track. Kuki Shinobu is a very interesting one. Being a long time in the making, was our first ever Electro healer. Well, and many other things. They call her a jack of all trades in her trailer for a reason, and I will get to that later. And then finally, Shikanoin Heizou, who with our previous expectations, we were thinking he was either going to be weak, constellation locked, or flat out unusable until much later. But we were oh so wrong and pleasantly surprised, and I'll thankfully have to talk less about him in a negative way, since he is a very good standard for 4 stars that we've been lacking and wanting. But with all that said, in this video I want to talk about each of the Inazuma 4 stars, showing their hidden utility in special teams, niche playstyles, some of their downsides for being niche, and the ways that characters like these can improve with Dendro on the horizon. I'll be littering some fun facts and some tips on playing and building each character in between too. And finally, there will not be any leaked information, only speculative with a keen eye. With each of these characters, I will use specialized icons showing their roles in a team to show off some niche playstyles or some fun tips on how to play these characters in a fun and optimal way. Red icons will be DPS icons, blue icons will be sub-DPS icons, purple is supportive icons, orange is supportive number 2 icons, and green icons will be healers and shielders that may have multiple roles and uses in a team. Alright, with all that, let's get started and talk about Sayu first. Sayu's probably the most difficult one to pinpoint in terms of her use. If you don't have Jean, Sayu is a good alternative, but they are very different characters in terms of what they can bring. Jean is more raw Nemo, not to mention a 5-star, with small swirl utility niches like Sunfire Jean setups, and Sayu having almost all swirl and elemental mastery setups with small raw Anemo damage. But even with Sayu's constellations, they give her more elemental mastery scaling and swirl damage, so it's really tough to argue where Sayu's place lies outside of swirl. So let's talk about Sayu's niches and strengths to see if you can appreciate her a little more. Aside from Sayu's ability to wield claymores that could be used to buff the team, the weapon type might not matter at all, and you can run her in a fun swirl team comp, Driver Team. This team comprises of a unique setup of radial abilities. What are radial abilities? Circular abilities that center around your active character, but these radial abilities I'm talking about are ones that rotate around your character. Sayu can roll and rotate herself really fast, and for these abilities that I'm showing you here, which happen to be Kaya and Xiangling's elemental bursts, if you rotate them backwards you can get more hits on enemies per second. Now sure, this doesn't abide by the ICD rules, like, internal cooldowns of reactions, but it still gives you more hits that you'll be dealing per second that will be a damage increase. All while being an Anemo Viridescent Swirler who is a pseudo driver. Unfortunately though, she got a little power crept by Heizou in this role, but it's still a niche that she can benefit from swirl and healing with her damage. With Kaya in mind, you can also think about her as a permafreeze swirler as well, with any sort of off-field Hydro applicator, unfortunately a little bit more restricted. Speaking of restrictions, Sayu can't really crowd control. She can be a swirler in teams that need a healer, but of course she doesn't have that crowd control. And sort of continuing on our negatives, unfortunately, I forgot to mention that Sayu unfortunately struggles in not having a shield to protect herself while she is rolling. This sort of ruins synergies that she has by needing to have a shield to be optimal, and if we could just have damage reduction or super armor for her skill, I think that would be really good. I don't know if she has them already, but it sort of is a little bit hard to dodge and need to be protected when she's rolling around. She also doesn't synergize really well with standard taser teams that use Beidou and Xingqiu, since normal attacks need to be triggered in order to use them. You may have noticed that I didn't really mention any more niches for poor Sayu outside of being a swirl healer in the Anemo element. That's pretty much all Sayu does. She's unfortunately just those things, a great healer that can swirl, but she needs a lot more from her own team in order to be used properly, whereas as an Anemo healer like Jean can just be slapped onto any team and work really well. It's rough. It really is. And I wish Sayu was better. So, unfortunately, Sayu's probably the only character in this list that I'm probably going to be the least well-versed on in terms of what her uses are. But with Dendro on the horizon, I feel like she could be a great support as a healer and swirler to the other elements into Dendro, since I feel like Dendro won't react with Anemo and Geo at this point, and this would be to Sayu's strength, since she would need to be swirling all the elements on the field and kind of move them around into the Dendro fields that maybe are off-field or something. But she would need a lot of energy recharge if she needs to be off-field, but she can be great for on-field too. I don't know, I feel like that's all I can say about Sayu for now, since I'd need to test her out to see her viability with Dendro, but the possibility is still there, don't you worry, Sayu mains. Now on to Kujou Sara. Sara has been the most divisive 4-star characters. On one hand, she's been amazing for physical teams and electro teams, and those two are her strongest niches. However, she can simply be replaced with Kazuha and Bennett for the electro teams, as long as you can deal with some slight annoying overload reaction knockback. But Sara really only gets her true strength for electro at C6, buffing electro crit damage by a large amount. But it's kind of ironic that she could be easily replaced, and she's an electro buffer. Anyway, let me just show you where Sara shines in some teams. The first, of course, is being an electro buffer for electro characters. I don't have C6, the Su curse was upon me during the Raiden Shogun's first banner, and even during her rerun I did not get more than 4 Saras. Ugh. But of course, if you put Bennett and Sara, you get disgusting large numbers, especially with C6, alongside Kazuha, and oof, that's a lot of damage on your Raiden Shogun or any other electro character. But outside of Shogun though, you don't really get very much unless you get Sara to C6 to amp up your other electro characters that happen to deal electro damage. It doesn't help how Sara is very clunky to play with her elemental skill, which should have more invincibility frames, which also seems to be a pattern for elemental skills in Inazuma. But for physical teams, it's almost like Sara and Raiden have been staples for somebody like Eula Physical. You know, Eula Physical Genshin Impact. But since this is about Sara, notice how Sara's buff and Eula's burst have quite similar durations, with Sara delaying her buff by at least 1 second for Eula to use her burst on it, which is 7 seconds to Sara's 6. But therein lies the issue. Sara has such short buff timings. Bennett has a solid 12 seconds, which is double of Sara's, even if it is an elemental burst. He can get it super fast. That's just ridiculous. At least 8 seconds would have been perfect. But alas, this is not our perfect world. At least Sara is kind of fun to play in co-op, and Sara's burst is powerful and deals a lot of electro damage. Well, yeah, unfortunately, Sara only fits in the Electro Buffer, Electro Applicator for Superconduct, and Burst Support roles, with some Burst DPS capabilities. Though with Dendro on the horizon, depending on how the Catalyze reaction will work with Electro and Dendro, I think Sara might be very strong for Electro characters in that style of team. If it debuffs Elemental Resistance or Electro Resistance, we will have to see. Now, there's a reason why I haven't been talking too much about Sayu and Sara in too many different teams, and that's because their utility only has one or two niche playstyles. Sayu having more than Sara, since Sara's role is pretty clear. I guess I also forgot to mention that Sayu has a really weird niche playstyle of Shatter DPS, but that isn't really like her role, so anyway, what even is Shatter? But on to Thoma. Ah yes, Thoma. The boy who lived, died, and will be coming back to life with Dendro, but I'll get to that later. But Thoma has already so many roles in game right now, but unfortunately he kinda needs his first two constellations and talent level 8s to be remotely usable, for his shielding capability at least. But anyway, on to those fun specialties and niche roles that Thoma can play. Sadly though, Thoma's outgoing damage is pretty bad, both pyro and physical, but he is an amazing setup for multiple reactions at once, or mainly overloaded while being a pyro applicator, and also benefiting from those reactions himself. If you at least have a Refinement 3 Kitain Spear, he can get some energy while triggering reactions pretty well. And Constellations again make the Kitain Spear much better, so I wouldn't invest too much unless you have Constellation 2 and Kitain Spear up to Refinement 3, just so you know. Thoma himself can trigger the overloaded reaction or set up a bunch of pyro application with what other pyro applicator you have for your electro character trigger reactions, like a full to medium EM Fischl, Yaimiko, or Shinobu. One of my favorite teams include Shinobu, Thoma, and nearly any other Hydro character with a flex slot like an Anemo Swirler. You could run Heizou as the on-field Swirler with an off-field Hydro, and it's completely nuts. It's nuts what you could do with pyro application from Thoma's shields, while he's also a shielder in this current meta. Just imagine this with Dendro reactions, guys. It's gonna be so good. And I'll talk about it later, but I feel like Shinobu and Thoma with shielder and healer combos are very, very underrated, but so powerful because they share the role of healer and shielder, and they just deal so much damage on their own with reactions. So you can just have a flex slot of any DPS and support you want, because they're already doing really good support by shielding and healing. Anyway, if I didn't talk about Thoma's pyro reaction shielding capabilities like enough, I feel like with Dendro coming out, he's gonna open so many more roles for Dendro reactions, like burning and the bloom plus pyro explosion reaction. Maybe that explosion will damage players, and burning grass will also hurt around you. So pyro shields are gonna be quite effective when Dendro comes out. I just absolutely know it, especially for the overworld. Anywho, that's Thoma. I talked about him a lot because I think he's still underrated, even though we all thought he was bad. I think he's going to come straight up from the ashes and become a really meta character. Next, I'm going to talk very briefly about Gorou, but let me just quickly lament and grieve for the 8th time that EM damage Gorou does not exist. Okay, now that I did that, I think for the Gorou section that I'm only going to talk about Gorou's fun Geo team setups, but like only his builds, because he already has really set teams with being a support for a mono Geo team, whether it's 2, 3, or 4, basically a guaranteed resonance team, so there isn't much deviation in teams, just swapping out Geo characters. But there is multiple build setups that you can do with Gorou himself. Maybe I'll make a video on it at some point since I'm a Gorou boy, but anyway, Gorou and his Geo teams can be built in 5 ways. Yes, you heard me, 5 ways. This is because unlike Yunjin, Gorou's support is talent level only and flat defense buffing, not through his own stats thankfully, making him quite versatile in his builds. Now let's start. He can be a boring Geo battery, which is boring, but it certainly works if you have him Favonius Bow or Sacrificial Bow, just being a energy bot. Boring, but move on. The other role is being a weird sub DPS, which can work with, 4-piece Opulent Husk. A main DPS, which I'm going to show my lovely viewer and friend Cam's DPS Gorou, which is nutty, especially with the Aqua Simulacra she just got. And then a healer Gorou, which can be used with a 2-piece healing bonus, 2-piece defense, or 4-piece Opulent Husk for a sub DPS hybrid healer build. His healing isn't great unless you use like Sacrificial Bow or Favonius Bow with enough energy, but he's a decent sub healer or minimal healer with, maybe a Zhongli shield. And then finally, the role that is truly my copium turning into a reality with a real build without any damage is an EM-focused Gorou with crystallized shielding, with the stringless. Guys, if you have more than one stringless, the damage gained from the stringless is not a joke at R5. The EM on it makes it crystallize focused, and then the damage passive doesn't even make the damage look that bad. He's not gonna have crit, but whatever. Though this build should really only be used for Archaic Petra or 4-piece Noblesse, I think it's really strong. I personally like running a hybrid team with Itto and Kokomi, and whether I want to bring Yunjin or Albedo for my 3rd Geo is up to whether I want Kokomi to kill or not. And remember, as I mentioned before in previous videos and streams, if you've been to my streams at twitch.tv/oddster, Gorou's Crystallize works better with the higher defense of the character, since it redirects damage based on the defense of the active character. So on Itto being the active character, it's incredible and works like a Zhongli shield, but with more resistance to that element of the Crystallize, though no resistance shred. But if you have an elemental sub DPS like Yelan, which would be a really good choice, the 4-piece Petra bonus could benefit her too. Anyway, that's enough Gorou. Now for the fun one. Cookie Shinobu. Shinobu is basically green-haired because she is primed and ready for Dendro. She got that grass growing on her head. Okay, maybe not that crazy, but whatever. Seriously though, people underestimate Shinobu. I don't know what people are talking about recently with Shinobu in mind, but, there's constant comparisons with certain lead characters like Dori seemingly being an Electro support that may rival her spot. And I don't think so. Dori will have a completely different role and specialty, and Shinobu will have a different role and specialty. Whether they both heal is up in the air. Shinobu's specialty, though, is being a jack of all trades, being great at physical DPS with normal attacks, fluid and quick charge attacks with low stamina costs, an Electro healer, Electro applicator while being a healer, but she's a master of one thing: elemental reactions. Just look at one of her passives. This passive explains her playstyle above all. It converts EM into healing and damage, but mostly healing, since her base damage scaling on HP is kind of negligible, so her Electro damage is poo-poo. But being a reliable healer while upkeeping and creating elemental reactions? That's nuts! Shinobu's strength is in Electro elemental reaction teams. Taser? Overloaded? Yes, I said overloaded. Overvape? Fireworks? Superconduct for physical teams? And finally, Dendro on the horizon, with more elemental reactions that definitely react with Electro. Here though, I will show you a Shinobu overloaded team, which makes the Pyro on-field applicator or DPS a fast enough Pyro to cause Shinobu to react with her triggering overloaded. You have to stack EM on her, but it's super underrated, and remember that passive makes her heal with this build. This can work with literally anybody who's a main DPS. Hu Tao, Diluc, Yoimiya, Yanfei, Klee. The list goes on, and if she runs the 4-piece Millilith, she buffs that Pyro DPS even further. But for Overloaded specifically, I think the better DPS to take are the mono Pyro DPS like Yoimiya and Klee, since you should almost make a mono Pyro team with that kind of setup, whereas the other Pyro DPS might need reactions or are much more powerful with other Vaporize and Melt reactions. But you can still use any of those Pyro DPS, and an Overvape team, which is mega strong right now, especially with Fischl, is really strong too with Shinobu. And literally any Pyro DPS I just mentioned. Before I end off Kuki Shinobu's madness section, I think with Dendro, she will be really strong and will apply really consistent catalyze reactions while healing, even triggering some elemental reaction-based reaction damage, I hope. I don't know, maybe Electro Bloom will be really strong because her skill's AoE will trigger them, and you just need to be really close to the little blooms to trigger it. I think it'll be nuts in an Electrocharge Swirl Dendro team, especially if there are multiple blooms more than one that will be triggered at once, and I have a feeling that really will be the case. You just need Shinobu for those Electro reactions too. It's gonna be nuts, you guys. Just imagine Shinobu, Hydra Applicator, Dendro Applicator, and a Swirl character. It's gonna be crazy. Like, I can't wait. Alright, well, I've talked up the wall about Shinobu, and I hope you guys are nice to Shinobu players and Shinobu as a design, because she's going to be busted, and she's busted now. We'll have to see how Dendro will be, but I bet she'll be even more busted. Now finally with Heizou, which I won't really talk a whole lot about since he's really popular and his roles are really easy to determine. He's also a really great 4-star. He's a great sub DPS, a Nemo Swirl driver, with better damage than Sucrose but less support than Sucrose and much less CC, and he's a great option in most teams. Though unlike Sucrose, Heizou does really well in freeze teams without wasting much support utility on freeze because it causes no reactions, right? Freeze also clumps enemies together really well, so he doesn't need much CC anyway. But as I showed before, he works amazingly well in any kind of off-field taser or overvape teams with multiple hits or reactions going off. Ugh, especially pairing him with any normal attack triggering abilities like Beidou, Fischl, Yelan, and Xingqiu. Those are all amazing options. But I bet half the player base already knows that. But as for Sumeru Dendro teams, I think Heizou will be a great driver, but we gotta hope that either Kole, Tignari, or Dendro Traveler will be off-field Dendro applicators, so Heizou can shine in being an on-field Anemo Swirler. And remember, I don't think Dendro will react with Swirl, so he'll be swirling other elements. So it's certainly a future-proofed team, but we'll have to see. Alright. Oh! Well, this was a little longer than I expected, but those are all the Inazuma 4-stars and their playstyles and why they are so niche. This video wasn't super organized, and I'm very sorry about that, since I mostly wanted to word barf all of my points instead of being a robot talking about the best teams with each of these. I know shorthand videos are like, you know, really popular, but I just can't seem to catch the design of fucking short videos on YouTube. I just can't do it. I'm sorry, but hope you enjoyed anyway. I think this kind of video is a fun little speculation, though, on how these characters' power will evolve in the future, especially with Dendro being the first major shakeup in the meta, and it's sort of a conspiracy that some of these Inazuma 4-stars have been buffed by Dendro, whether by future-proofing or by deliberate buffing. We'll have to see. But I also think that Hydro and Electro will be the new meta, and it's already starting to become the new meta, so we'll have to see. What do you guys think, though? Were there any niche builds or playstyles that you enjoy on some of these characters that I did not mention? And if you mentioned physical DPS, then please mention what kind of build works best for them, because I personally don't think something like physical Thoma DPS with Bolide is even that good, even though in theory it would be amazing. Anyway, that's that aside. I hope you guys enjoyed, and like and subscribe for more of these kinds of discussion-y videos. And be sure to share this video to people you might know that may appreciate this video for underrated 4 stars or may main these 4 stars. They deserve some love and appreciation and more team building opportunities, so I hope I fulfilled that at least a little bit in this video. Alright, anyway, thanks for watching everyone. I'll see you later. Bye-o.